infrastructure.
A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is on assignment.
Hello and thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. Baby boom in Kenya. With the population set to double by 2050, the focus turns to contraception.
Also underway, the fight against Ebola. Researchers race to develop a vaccine.
In Uganda, a young entrepreneur makes his mark in manufacturing.
And here in the U.S., improving education and opportunities for young Native Americans.
We bring you the stories behind these stories next on Assignment.
In Kenya, a population explosion. Within the next 35 years, the number of people there is expected to double. It's a situation likely to further strain resources and the economy.
So how is the government responding? VOA East Africa correspondent Gabe Joslow tells me family planning, providing contraception and education to women, is the answer for officials seeking to control the growth.
There are more than 40 million people in Kenya, and the population keeps rising. The average family has 5 children, and while that number is down from 2 decades ago, the exploding population is outpacing the provision of resources and services, which are already stretched thin.
You know, the government has been aware for a long time that Kenya is a booming population, that the more people who are born here, the more resources are going to be needed, the more jobs are going to need to be created. And so the government has been pretty good about trying to come up with systems to give mothers mostly more choices in how they and they can decide how many children they want to have, and so they can decide the size of their families and move on from there.
Now, Gabe, as you reported, this can be a sensitive and even taboo topic. So was it difficult for you to get women to speak to you about this?
Surprisingly not difficult in the places I went. I went into the Kibera area, which is a slum. It's an informal neighborhood in Nairobi. And we just walked into some health clinics to see who was hanging around that day. And we happened to meet a woman who was just consulting with a clinician about her contraception. So we told her the story we were doing, and she was very open to talk about it. I think that actually represents changing attitudes.
Now, you mentioned in your report the need to prevent population growth from outpacing the economy. What happens if that does come true?
The things that you're already starting to see in a big capital city like Nairobi, which is overcrowding, poverty, hunger, lack of clean water and other resources like that, and especially like really housing is a really big issue. Those kind of problems will only get worse when you have a population, an unsustainable population growth. If the economy can go a little bit faster, then it can support rising population, but it is that balance that you're trying to achieve.
Is there any kind of religious component to this, Gabe? I know that the talk around contraception in this country often falls along religious lines. Is that the case in Kenya as well?
The Catholic Church in particular in Kenya will sometimes talk out against certain contraception use. They have made somewhat, well, I'd say unbased claims that the government is trying to sterilize women, or that that there is a more nefarious sort of motivation out there for encouraging women to use contraception.
So, Gabe, we see this opening up of contraception rights in Kenya, but how does that relate to overall reproductive rights for women?
Well, that's the thing, is that while there has been an expansive availability of contraception, there are other issues still to be addressed in reproductive rights. The issue of abortion is especially contentious in the country. In September, there was a male nurse who was sentenced to death just for helping a woman who had eventually died from a botched abortion attempt.
Is the government showing any signs of becoming more progressive on that?
Not at the moment, but in my reporting, I've heard that there's some movements, there's some NGOs who are working on petitioning the government to make clearer rules about abortion, to make fairer rules, and again, to just ensure that it's more easily available in a safe way for women who require it.
And finally, Gabe, how does this represent what's going on in the rest of the continent? Is this something that we're seeing in other countries as well?
Oh yeah, well, we're definitely seeing enormous population growth across Africa. I mean, I saw some statistics from UNICEF that came out a few months ago saying that by the year 2050, 40% of all the children that are born in the world will be born in Africa. And so that just means that the continent is growing at an enormous pace. You're talking about up to 4 billion people on the continent by the end of the century. So, you know, the place it's a huge expanse of land. It's possible you could accommodate this number of people. But the question, like in Kenya, across the continent, is can the economies support such a massive population growth?
Thanks to VOA's Gabe Joslow in Nairobi. We are taking a break now.
But still to come, our VOA health reporter talks about research underway on a possible Ebola vaccine. You're watching On Assignment.
Scientists around the world are working to develop a vaccine against the Ebola virus. Since the outbreak began in West Africa in December 2013, more than 20,000 people have been infected and over 8,000 of them have died. But research teams are working on new vaccines with urgency and speed. I've got VOA's Carol Pearson with me now to talk about all this research. Carol, health workers may be getting better at treating Ebola when it does strike a person, but what are they hoping can happen with these vaccines?
Well, vaccines are given to healthy people, number one. You don't give vaccines to sick people. So you want to make sure that the vaccine does no harm. At the very least, it might not prevent you from getting the disease, but it should not make you sick or promote any allergies, or it has to do no harm. There are a number of vaccines, and the World Health Organization said 2 are really ready now to go into mass production and be tried in the 3 countries most affected by the Ebola virus. And one is by GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and the other is by Merck. Scientists all over the world are working on vaccines. The Canadian country of Canada, has been involved. There are the U.S. National Institutes of Health are involved. There, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, GlaxoSmithKline, all the major vaccine, all the major
companies.
All the major manufacturers are involved.
Now it's interesting because it seems like we've been hearing a lot less about Ebola lately. How bad of a threat is it still?
I just was talking to Dr. Tom Frieden, who returned from visiting Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone recently. And he's head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. There have been great strides in containing the disease. However, until you get to 0, it can come flaring back. And one of the big fears is that it's in the forest regions of these countries. So where transportation is not good, where you can't even fly in things by helicopter effectively. So you want to make sure in the forest regions that there are 0 outbreaks before you can say this epidemic is over.
So once these vaccines are able to be rolled out, who gets them first?
Healthcare workers, because they're the most at risk. They expose themselves or they see patients with Ebola every single day. So they are most at risk for getting this. And you also have to track the vaccines and see how well they do and see how well a response they have in a person's system. So, you want an immunological response. So healthcare workers are the easiest to keep track of. Otherwise, you don't know if any of these vaccines do any good.
Of course, right, because they're the ones being exposed. Now, there's a lot of fear a lot of times we see when it comes to vaccines. So what would you say to people, especially we have a number of, we have a large audience in Africa. What would you say to people who might be afraid when they see these vaccines become available?
Well, that's one of the things that Dr. Frieden was talking about. First of all, these vaccines have been through phase 1 trials, which means that they have been tried on a small group, about 20 people, to see if they do no harm or if they do any harm. And this small group of people, they're all volunteers. There were people at the National Institutes of Health here in Washington who volunteered. There have been other people who volunteered in Italy and elsewhere. So they were the guinea pigs to find out if there were any allergic reactions or bad reactions to these vaccines. And when they get through phase 1 clinical trials, if there are bad reactions, they either rethink it or they drop it because they know it's not going to work.
Very important work that's being done. Carol, very important work you're doing in covering this for us. Again, Carol Pearson is VOA's health reporter. All right, we are taking another break now. When we return, what it takes to be an entrepreneur in Uganda. You're watching On Assignment. The Mandela Washington Fellowship, part of President Barack Obama's Young African Leadership Initiative, or YALI, brings hundreds of young Africans to the U.S. to study, enhance their careers, and return home with all these new skills to put to use.
And one of last year's fellows is the founder of a cleaning products manufacturing company in Uganda. VOA's Paul Ndiho met up with him there and tells On Assignment's Philip Alexio all about it. Take a look.
We are just going to shape it into...
It's been said that necessity is the mother of invention. It's likely that Martin Mugabe thought about that when he started his Kampala-based business, Twinkle Industries, a cleaning products manufacturing company. When Mugabe found that many chemical soaps irritated his sensitive skin, he began making his own soap and laundry detergent.
He started out in a totally different field, farming. His niche was farming. He created a farm. He went out there and bought land, and he created 500 acres of land. So he has been farming and employing so many people in that region. But then along the way, he found out that he was actually dealing in a product that could be used, palm oil, that could be used in making soap, cooking oil. So when he came out here, he came here to Washington. He was part of the YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative, who were here in Washington. That's how I met him. He got an opportunity to be affiliated with a soap, a cleaning products manufacturing company. So he learned a lot of skills. When he went back, he just refined what he already had on the ground and started producing this product that is actually giving the other laundry detergent products on the market a run for their money.
It's a super laundry detergent that has been manufactured to save people money and time. When you use it for clothes, you don't need bar soap like many people do here. You don't even need powder soap. You just put the liquid formula we have developed in your water. You mix it up properly. Put your clothes, you don't need to soak. You wash your clothes and it comes out clean.
Well, how difficult is it to start a business in Uganda?
It's a long process. Sometimes it takes a lot of backdoor dealings. Obviously, there is also corruption involved. You have to grease so many hands before you can put your product out there. But I think for him, he's very, very focused. He's highly motivated. And he said, you know what, whatever it takes, he's going to follow that. He's not like rushing to be the next big guy on the market. He wants to take it slowly until he can fill all the shops around.
For a rising firm like Twinkle Industries, developing soaps and detergents can be a perfect business opportunity if you have the right formula and equipment to manufacture the products. His products can be found in shops across Kampala and its surrounding areas.
What's the scope of the soap business? How many people does he employ?
Frankly speaking, he has about 8 people.
8 more people than you and I employ.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, I don't even have a single person that I employ. So he's, and people depend on him, really. When he took it to the shops, people seem to like the product.
You get any complaints from customers?
Apparently, no, and the customers who have already bought it, they don't say anything about the product.
He is really very concerned also about helping the community as well. It's not just about the product, right?
Yeah, I think he told me his ultimate goal is not about making money.
Okay.
His ultimate goal is really to be part of the community.
Twinkle industry has been praised by the local community leaders. Faizo Kibirige is the chairman of the village.
For us as a community, if a youth like this gentleman starts creating a job, in fact, he created a job, now he gave other jobs. Now we have about 4 workers.
He's a very, very simple guy. When you're talking to him, or even if you met him on the street, you would not know that he's behind the product that is being sold in some of these stores. As of today, he was actually telling me that he has added another line of products. Now he's going to start producing cooking oil.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the kind of guy that he is.
And moving on now from Africa to the American heartland. President Barack Obama has begun new initiatives aimed at helping young American Indians or Native Americans overcome the many challenges they face, from poverty to substance abuse.
In June of last year, Mr. Obama became only the 4th sitting U.S. president to visit an American Indian reservation. And as VOA's Aru Pandey tells me, it's all part of a larger effort to provide better educational and other opportunities for these Native Americans.
Let's put our minds together to improve our schools, because our children deserve a world-class education too.
President Barack Obama met with young people here at Cannonball Grade School in June. During that visit, he said expanding educational opportunity and economic development are key to strengthening tribal communities.
Just looking at the youth, first of all, nearly half of Native Americans are under 24. And then if you look in that subgroup, you have a third of children, Native American children, living in poverty. When I was doing the story, I was kind of looking at some of the facts, and I mean, suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. Wow. And it's funny, when I went to the reservation, almost everyone I talked to knew someone who had attempted suicide or had killed themselves. And then obviously not just with the youth, but there's a problem of unemployment. But the good thing is there is now a concerted effort on the part of this current administration to try to really address them. So.
During his June visit to Standing Rock, President Obama heard firsthand from tribal youth about the obstacles they face. The rare visit deeply moved Mr. Obama.
We want to give those young people and young Native Americans like them the support they deserve. We have to invest in them and believe in them and love them. And if we do, there's no question of the great things they can achieve, not just for their own families, but for their nation and for the United States.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that government response because, you know, the nation, of course, has a very sensitive, very controversial history with the Native American population to begin with. And then you have the White House 2014 Native Youth Report that you reported on in your story, acknowledging that past federal policy failings have contributed to these really terrible conditions in the community. How exactly has that happened?
Well, taking education, for example, there's really assessing the way the education system has been run. I mean, historically, when you talk about past failings, just grievances, and I talk about this in some of my stories, the fact that so many Native Americans were either forced to go to boarding schools or basically forced to assimilate. And so in one way, they lost a huge part of their culture, their language, that generation. Then when you talk about just, you know, physically, you look at the school systems, the infrastructure is crumbling in a number, like I think a third of schools run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs are said to be in poor condition.
Okay, we're going to give you a tour of our school. This is the Cannonball School.
For school board member Sue Isbell, the need for more funding is apparent as she walks through the grade school, which was built in the 1930s.
There's mold, we struggle with leaks, the ceilings leak. It's just one Band-Aid after another.
Thank you, third graders, for waiting.
Cannonball residents like Randy Dogskin say a better facility for the school of 100 students would help to boost morale for tribal youth who already have among the highest high school dropout rates in the nation.
They're going to be our leaders, you know, one day, and we want them to have that opportunity to know that the reservation here is hard, but there is a lot of good here.
The Interior Secretary Sally Jewell says she needs $1 billion to fix the crumbling schools. So these are some of the failings that they're talking about, and it's a combination, whether it be neglect, not really addressing some of these issues, and until it's really come to a level here.
Point,
yeah,
really,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, this is unsustainable. So I think that those are some of the issues that were addressed in the report, and obviously with this conference, education was a big part of that. And what they're trying to do is, for example, the Bureau of Indian Affairs that runs the schools on the reservations, they're trying to restructure that. So instead of providing education, there'll be more of a support system. So they're looking at a number of different ways, whether it be addressing the crumbling infrastructure, whether it be looking at the management, how these contracts are awarded. They found there were fraud and there's a number of issues.
A major museum in Washington recently put its entire collection online, providing unprecedented access to one of the world's most important holdings of Asian and American art.
Well, most of the works have never been seen by the public before, but they can now be downloaded and in many cases for free. VOA's Julie Tabo gives us a glimpse of some of the collection's vast high-resolution offerings in this report.
The objects have deep cultural and historical significance. They include Chinese ceramics and Islamic art, masterworks from Persia, objects from Egypt and around Asia, and even works of art by American-born artist James McNeill Whistler. Now they're available online, a digital first for 2 Smithsonian museums in Washington, the Freer and Sackler Galleries. More than 40,000 objects digitized and released online.
It's really important to us that everybody who wants to see the objects that we have has access to them.
Courtney O'Callahan is the Chief Digital Officer at the Freer and Sackler Galleries.
We're hoping that small children, kids doing homework assignments, scholars who are unable to come to the Smithsonian, artists who are looking for inspiration, these are all our target audiences.
Perfect specimen of its type.
Jan Stewart, curator of Chinese art at the Freer and Sackler Galleries, agrees.
It's starting something that's going to accelerate research, as well as just please everybody who loves beauty, who's interested in history, who's interested in civilization.
It took 15 years to shoot and digitize the thousands of objects as shown in this time-lapse video, from textiles and paintings to sculptures and ancient manuscripts. O'Callahan says there are many benefits to seeing digital versions of art. When viewed in person, for example, it's difficult to see the details of Whistler's famed Peacock Room due to the low lighting conditions that help preserve the exhibit. But this digital panoramic view highlights the more than 250 ceramics that museum founder Charles Lang Freer collected on his travels to Egypt, Iran, Japan, China, and Korea.
Here's an amazing sculpture that has very detailed relief pattern on it that is very hard to see with the naked eye. And with using 3D, not only are people able to see all around this object, but they're able to change the lighting and change the color, and it has really helped scholars better understand the stories on it.
O'Callahan believes making art accessible online will be a growing trend for museums and says the galleries plan to digitize every work of art added to the collection. Julie Tabo, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Alex, those Smithsonian virtual museums are open all the time, but I'm afraid it's closing time here at On Assignment as we wrap up this week's show.
It is, but just like those virtual museums you find online, you can check us out anytime online at voanews.com and on Facebook and YouTube.
We'll be back next week with a look at how the terror attack on cartoonists in France is even affecting events in Germany.
Thanks so much for coming along with us here at On Assignment. Until next time, so long from Washington.